Imagine for a second trying to get just your extended family to agree on where to go for dinner.
Oh, that is usually total chaos.
Right. Complete chaos. So now I want you to scale that up. Imagine trying to get 110 different countries to sit down in New Delhi and actually agree on the future of artificial intelligence, climate change, and global security.
Yeah, getting 110 countries to agree on basically anything sounds impossible.
It really does. But, diving into the notes from the 11th Raisina Dialogue, which happened in March 2026, it kind of proves that the old ways of diplomacy are just dead.
Completely dead. I
Yeah.
mean, we're not talking about lines on a map anymore.
Exactly. We're talking about microchip supply chains, digital sovereignty, and nations basically bypassing the UN to form these weird pop-up coalitions.
Yeah, it's a completely different landscape.
So let's jump into this deep dive. We are going to unpack how this massive gathering is rewriting the rules of the global board and, how India is actively positioning itself as the architect of this new era.
Sounds good. And, the sheer scale of this gathering in New Delhi
Yeah.
really dictates how we need to look at global politics right now.
This is huge, right?
Massive. We saw roughly 2,700 participants. You've got heads of state, military commanders, tech CEOs, academics, all in one place.
Which sounds like a logistical nightmare.
Oh, definitely.
Right.
But what you immediately sense when you look at the architecture of these discussions is the intense friction. I mean, before anyone could even debate artificial intelligence or shipping routes, they had to grapple with this foundational philosophical clash.
Yeah, and that clash was framed by the official theme of the event, which was samskara.
Right, the Sanskrit word.
Yeah, and the organizers broke it down into three core concepts, which were assertion, accommodation, and advancement.
It's a really interesting framework.
It is, because it forces you to acknowledge basic human nature first. They are essentially saying that right now, every single nation is trying to loudly assert its own civilizational identity.
Right, everyone wants to stand out.
But at the exact same time, the reality of a globalized economy means everyone is forced to accommodate vastly different cultures and working styles.
Yeah, you can't just operate in a vacuum.
Exactly. And somehow, through all that noise and clashing identity, humanity still has to find a way to advance collectively. I keep picturing this as a massive global group project.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Like half the class is fiercely independent and refuses to follow the syllabus. The other half is desperately trying to mediate, and the professor is just demanding that they pass the final exam together.
It's exactly like a group project.
Mm-hmm.
But one where half the students are actively trying to rewrite the grading rubric while the project is actually being graded.
That sounds incredibly stressful.
It is. Because civilizational identity, that assertion piece, is currently clashing violently with the realities of globalization.
Because for, the last 30 years or so, the assumption was totally different.
Right. For decades, the assumption was that economic integration would just naturally smooth over cultural and nationalistic differences.
That accommodation would just be automatic.
Exactly. But the consensus in New Delhi basically shattered that illusion. We are living in a highly fragmented world where asserting your nation's unique identity is, well, it's politically profitable.
It wins elections.
Yes, but failing to accommodate global supply chains is economically disastrous. So balancing those two extremes to figure out collective advancement is the ultimate diplomatic tightrope right now.
Which brings us to the actual mechanism of that advancement, because we all know semiconductors and algorithms are the new oil, right?
Absolutely.
But what really caught my eye was India's specific play here to navigate that tightrope. The answer at Raisina wasn't about negotiating new physical borders.
No, it was entirely about technology.
Right. And they didn't just talk about it. They actually launched a massive framework called the Raisina Science Diplomacy Initiative, or the SDI.
And the SDI marks a really fundamental shift in how power is projected globally.
How so? I mean, since when are foreign diplomats haggling over semiconductor supply chains? Isn't that a job for, tech CEOs in Silicon Valley?
You would think so, but no. Instead of treating technology as just a commercial sector managed by Silicon Valley or Shenzhen, the SDI explicitly integrates technological innovation directly into global foreign policy.
Wow.
Yeah, it basically forces diplomats to become technologists.
They actually framed this whole dynamic around a vision they called Tomorrowland, a push toward what they hope is a techtopia, which sounds very sci-fi.
It does, but they aren't just philosophizing about robots here.
No. The SDI is aggressively targeting AI governance, securing the manufacturing supply chains for advanced semiconductors, And most importantly, the export of India's digital public infrastructure, or DPI, to developing nations.
That last piece is fascinating.
It really is. They aren't just haggling over chips, they are weaponizing their digital ecosystem as a diplomatic export.
Well, weaponizing might be a slightly strong word, but they are certainly leveraging it as a profound tool of statecraft.
Right, fair enough.
To really understand why DPI is such a game changer, you have to look at the mechanics of it. India built this foundational digital layer for its own population.
Starting with the Aadhaar digital ID system, right?
Exactly. And then moving to the Unified Payments Interface, or UPI, for instant digital transactions and adding data exchange protocols.
Which allowed millions of unbanked citizens to just suddenly participate in the digital economy almost overnight.
Right. It was revolutionary for them. So what the SDI does is take that open source blueprint and offer it to countries in Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia.
Which completely bypasses the traditional model of foreign aid.
Entirely.
Because if you're a developing nation, you usually have to choose between taking massive high-interest loans from Western institutions or, taking those predatory infrastructure loans from a superpower to build physical roads and ports.
Which leaves you drowning in debt.
Exactly. But by offering DPI, India is basically saying, hey, we won't build your physical bridges, but we will hand you the software to build your entire digital banking and identity system for free.
It's diplomacy through open source tech, not debt.
It's brilliant.
It is. And that creates massive geopolitical loyalty and interoperability without firing a single shot or signing a defense treaty. Because technology is the new geography.
I love that phrase. Technology is the new geography.
It's the truth. If you are a diplomat today, you cannot merely secure a mountain pass or a river delta. You have to secure server farms and data architectures.
Because if a nation relies on your digital infrastructure, you have immense soft power.
Exactly. Furthermore, if you dictate the international regulations around artificial intelligence, you dictate future economic competitiveness.
Which makes Tomorrowland the primary battlefield.
Yes, it's about data sovereignty. Whoever controls the flow and security of a citizen's data effectively controls the state.
Okay, so if borders in the cloud are becoming just as important as borders on a map, we have to look at how countries are actually teaming up to secure those borders.
Right, because the alliances are shifting.
Dramatically. The 2026 dialogue made it abundantly clear that the old Cold War-era system of rigid two-player alliances is just completely obsolete.
It's a relic.
Hmm.
We are firmly operating in a multipolar world now, and the Global South is actively reshaping the board.
Yeah, the phrase dominating those specific discussions was contested frontiers.
Which is a recognition that power is now deeply diffuse. You have the traditional heavyweights, obviously, but you also have these rising powers demanding a seat at the table.
Creating a lot of friction on the periphery.
Immense friction. So to manage this multipolarity, we are seeing a massive rise in what are being called flexible plurilateral groupings.
I found this concept so telling about the current state of global trust. I mean, a plurilateral grouping is basically an ad hoc, issue-specific coalition, right?
Pretty much.
I was thinking about it like that. It's like forming a quick group chat on your phone with a few people just to organize a specific weekend trip.
I like that.
Rather than creating a formal, legally binding club with a constitution, a president, and like monthly dues, you get in, you solve the problem, and you get out.
It's a highly transactional group chat, yes. These countries aren't forming lifelong friendships or swearing mutual defense. They are forming pop-up supply chains to bypass massive global tariffs and bureaucratic gridlock.
Because we are living in an era defined by economic nationalism.
Exactly. The dialogue called it trade in the time of tariffs. Protectionism is rampant, trade wars are the norm, and supply chains are constantly disrupted by geopolitical shocks.
So in that environment, old-school alliances like the UN or the WTO are simply too slow.
Way too slow. A treaty that takes 10 years to negotiate is utterly useless when a microchip shortage can crash your entire auto industry in 10 weeks.
Wow, yeah. Which explains why India is essentially creating and moderating so many of these new group chats.
Their engagement strategy is relentless right now.
Yeah. You have BRICS, which is expanding and actively challenging Western economic dominance. But then you have highly targeted corridors like the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor.
Or IMEC?
Right, IMS. And the India-France-UAE Trilateral, the UFI.
Look at the mechanics of IMEC to understand why these plurilaterals are so vital today. IMEC isn't just a vague trade agreement. It's a physical, multimodal network designed to fundamentally alter global shipping.
How does it work exactly?
The goal is to move goods from India by ship to the UAE, put them on a rail network crossing Saudi Arabia and Jordan into Israel, and then ship them across the Mediterranean into Europe.
Wait, so it bypasses the Suez Canal entirely?
Exactly the point. It bypasses traditional geopolitical choke points that are currently highly vulnerable. It cuts transit times drastically and builds economic reliance between the Middle East and India.
So this is how a plurilateral grouping works in practice.
Yes, India leverages these nimble partnerships to act as a bridge between the global north, like France and Europe, and the global south.
It's basically a survival mechanism.
It is. Because in a world where you can no longer rely on a single superpower to guarantee open global trade, you have to build your own workarounds.
It's an incredibly pragmatic approach. You build these pop-up coalitions to secure your tech, secure your trade, and bypass the tariffs.
Right.
But underneath all of this clever maneuvering, there are massive, shared existential threats ticking in the background.
Oh, absolutely.
Threats that absolutely do not care about your digital borders or your clever new rail corridors.
You're talking about the governance of the global commons. You cannot have a functioning multipolar world if the foundation of the world itself is literally collapsing.
And the participants in New Delhi know they are losing this specific battle. The language they used to describe these threats was surprisingly bleak.
It was very stark,
Yeah, like when they addressed the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs.
which cover poverty reduction, global inequality, and food security by the year 2030.
Right. They didn't use hopeful diplomatic speak for this. They literally titled their core discussion on it White Whale.
Yeah, that stood out to me too.
They named their pursuit of sustainable development after Captain Ahab's impossible destructive obsession in Moby Dick. That is a stunning admission from the world's elite.
It really is.
Are they basically admitting that Agenda 2030 is becoming an impossible catch?
It is a very dark metaphor, but unfortunately an accurate one. The white whale framing acknowledges that the momentum has stalled.
Because of the economy.
Largely, yes. The economic shocks of the 2020s, combined with the trade protectionism we just discussed, have severely derailed global poverty reduction.
That makes sense.
But you have to connect the white whale to the other major theme they tackled, which they bluntly called the 11th hour.
Right. The terrifying intersection of climate change, global conflict, and the cost of doing absolutely nothing.
You cannot separate the two. You cannot achieve those elusive Agenda 2030 goals of ending poverty if you are at the 11th hour of climate delay.
The discussion heavily focused on climate finance, right?
Yes. The fact that developing nations are bearing the absolute brunt of extreme weather events while completely lacking the capital to transition to green energy.
It's a vicious cycle.
It is. When crops fail due to extreme heat, it drives resource scarcity. That immediately triggers geopolitical conflict and massive migration.
So the cost of failing to adapt isn't just environmental.
Not at all. It completely destabilizes the very economies trying to participate in those new plurilateral trade corridors we were talking about.
It's a domino effect. And the fragility of the global commons extends to the very technology they are all competing over, too.
Yes, repairing the commons was a huge topic.
They spent significant time discussing the need to repair governance over the oceans, cyberspace, and outer space. But what really struck me is how physically fragile our digital world actually is.
Oh, people rarely think about this.
Right. We talk about cyberspace as if it's this invisible, ethereal cloud floating above our heads, but the cloud isn't in the sky.
No, the cloud is at the bottom of the ocean.
Exactly. Our entire global internet, trillions of dollars in daily financial transactions, and all the data sovereignty we talked about earlier, it all relies on massive undersea communication cables.
Which makes maritime security the linchpin of everything.
This is where physical geography and digital geography just violently collide.
They do. Roughly 99% of international data traffic travels through these submarine cables.
Wow, 99%.
Yeah. So if a contested maritime zone, say, the Red Sea, the Indian Ocean, or the Indo-Pacific becomes an active conflict zone, those cables are highly vulnerable
To sabotage.
sabotage, or even just accidental severing from anchors.
So securing the oceans isn't just about making sure cargo ships carrying sneakers and oil can get through safely.
Wow.
It's about making sure the internet doesn't literally get cut in half. A physical naval standoff in the Red Sea directly threatens the techtopia we are supposedly building.
Exactly. Every single issue is stacked on top of the other.
Which is why the anxiety at Raisina was so palpable. You have nations trying to assert their identity while managing complex AI governance, while building new trade corridors to bypass tariffs.
All while the climate clock is ticking.
Right. And their entire digital economy relies on a few cables resting in the mud on the ocean floor.
It's incredibly precarious.
It really is. And that reality check leads perfectly into the biggest question of the entire event.
The implementation.
Yes, all these frameworks, the science diplomacy initiative, the plurilateral corridors, the push for climate finance, they sound incredibly profound when you have 2,700 brilliant minds trapped in a conference center in New Delhi.
They always do on paper.
Right. But what happens when the conference ends? What happens when everyone flies back to their capitals and actually has to face their own domestic parliaments?
That is the structural roadblock.
Because the underlying consensus from the event is that there is a massive roadblock standing in the way of all these solutions.
They call it the dreaded implementation gap.
The implementation gap.
Yeah. As much as the Raisina Dialogue serves to generate policy innovation, there's a stark realization that translating these shared ideas into concrete, binding policy is excruciatingly slow.
And sometimes completely impossible.
Unfortunately, yes.
So I have to play the skeptic for you listening here. If we have 110 countries talking, but everyone acknowledges that geopolitical polarization and increasing rivalry actively limit consensus, what is the point?
That's a fair question.
If fragmented global governance means these ideas rarely become reality, is a massive summit like the Raisina Dialogue just a high-end echo chamber for the global elite?
Well, if you judge the event solely by the number of binding treaties signed at the closing ceremony, then yes, it might look like an echo chamber.
But you're saying that's the wrong way to look at it.
I am. That misinterprets how modern statecraft actually functions. The roadblock itself, the polarization, and the broken global institutions is exactly why Raisina exists in the first place.
Because the formal systems are paralyzed.
Yes. The calls for reformed multilateralism were everywhere at the dialogue.
Right. They were basically screaming that the UN Security Council is fundamentally broken and no longer reflects the realities of 2026.
Because it doesn't. The formal institutions constructed after World War II are currently incapable of handling issues like AI sovereignty or multi-state cyber warfare.
They just aren't built for it.
No, they're paralyzed by vetoes and old rivalries. So, in an era categorized by declining trust in these multilateral institutions, having a massive informal space for dialogue is actually the primary deliverable.
It is confidence building.
Exactly. Even if it doesn't instantly result in a signed treaty, it builds the connective tissue required for those plurilateral group chats we talked about earlier.
That makes a lot of sense.
It allows policymakers, military leaders, and tech CEOs to engage in strategic thinking without the immediate paralyzing pressure of a binding UN vote.
I can float trial balloons?
Right. They can float ideas on semiconductor policy or maritime security off the record. And for India, it cements its role as the indispensable convening power.
By hosting this dialogue, India positions itself as the ideological bridge between the entrenched powers of the global north and the rising demands of the global south.
Exactly. It advances India's vision for a technology-driven, multipolar order outside the rigid, broken constraints of traditional global governance.
It's basically the ultimate networking event for the survival of the planet.
That's one way to put it, yeah.
So let's recap the terrain we've covered today. We started with the sheer friction of 2,700 leaders trying to balance national assertion with the need to advance together.
The Samskara framework.
Right. Then we explored how technology, specifically the weaponization of digital public infrastructure, has become the new geography.
Tomorrowland.
Yes. And we mapped out a multipolar reality where countries are ditching slow, formal alliances for highly transactional, plurilateral trade corridors like IMEC.
The pop-up group chats.
Exactly. And finally, we stared down the shared ticking clocks of a collapsing climate, the elusive white whale of sustainable development, and the physical vulnerability of the undersea cables running our digital world.
It represents a profound, accelerated shift in how global diplomacy operates.
It really does.
The old systems are fading, and nimble, technology-centric diplomacy is taking its place. But, this transition away from formal traditional structures leaves us with a critical vulnerability.
Oh, I like this. Leave us with something to chew on. What's the hidden danger in all of this?
Well, think about it. If traditional institutions like the United Nations are stalling out, and these flexible plurilateral alliances, these temporary issue-specific pop-up coalitions, are truly the future of global problem solving.
Right.
What happens to global accountability?
Oh, wow.
If a pop-up coalition builds an AI framework or a new trade corridor that accidentally or intentionally harms a smaller nation, there is no global court to appeal to.
Because it's not an official treaty.
Exactly. Are we moving toward a world where the biggest existential issues of our time are managed by private, unregulatable group chats rather than United Nations?
A fractured world run by transactional group chats. That is a fascinating and slightly terrifying reality to leave on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the 2026 Raisina Dialogue. We hope it gave you a much clearer picture of the technological and geopolitical forces actively rewriting the rules of our world, and we highly encourage you to keep exploring these shifts on your own. Until next time.